Your Marcus Brutus Calvus, a Roman gladiator who just killed his best friend in the arena for the entertainment of 50,000 screaming spectators. But instead of glory, you're being dragged through a hidden door beneath the Colosseum's blood-soaked sand. The cheers above fade as you descend into chambers that reek of human waste, rotting flesh, and pure terror. This isn't where gladiators go to die quickly. This is where the Roman Empire sends people to suffer beyond human comprehension. The executioner waiting for you isn't some brutal savage. He's Gaius Torquatus, a trained professional who studied human anatomy for 15 years. He knows exactly where to cut to keep you conscious for 3 days straight. He knows which bones to break to maximize agony while preventing death. He knows how to keep your heart beating while your mind shatters completely. And he's about to demonstrate why even battle-hardened gladiators like you wet themselves when they hear his name whispered in the darkness. What I'm about to reveal over the next 90 minutes will make you question everything you thought you knew about human cruelty. Tonight, you'll discover why Roman torture methods were so effective that Nazi interrogators studied them 2,000 years later. You'll learn about the punishment so horrific that grown men chose to kill their own children rather than watch them endure it. And if you stay with me until the very end, I'll reveal which Roman torture technique is still being used by governments today, hidden in facilities where international observers are never allowed to visit. But first, let me share something that will shock you to your core. In 2019, archaeologists excavating beneath Rome discovered a chamber containing 847 human skeletons. Every single one showed evidence of systematic torture, burn marks in precise patterns, bone fractures that could only come from specialized equipment, skull modifications that suggest victims were kept alive during procedures that should have killed them instantly. The chamber was sealed 1,900 years ago, but the screams still echo in the acoustic design of the stone walls. These weren't random acts of cruelty. These were systematic experiments in human suffering, documented with the same precision Romans used to build their aqueducts and roads. We found training manuals written in perfect Latin, describing how to inflict maximum pain while avoiding vital organs. We found metal instruments so precisely crafted that modern surgeons can barely replicate their accuracy. We found evidence of a torture school where Roman executioners learned their trade like doctors learn medicine. The Romans didn't just execute criminals. They transformed human agony into public theater that could draw crowds larger than modern football stadiums. Every scream was choreographed. Every drop of blood served a purpose. Every death was designed to send a message that echoed throughout the civilized world. This is what happens when you defy Rome. Over the next hour and a half, I'm going to take you deep into the underground world of Roman torture, where pain was elevated to an art form and death was considered an act of mercy. You'll meet the victims whose names were recorded in executioners' logs, whose final words were preserved in official reports, whose suffering was so complete that it broke not just their bodies, but their souls. And you'll understand why these methods were so effective that they shaped human behavior for the next 2 millennia. If content like this fascinates and disturbs you in equal measure, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Only 18% of you watching are actually subscribed, and your support helps me bring you more content exploring the darkest chapters of human history that mainstream historians prefer to ignore. So settle back, close your eyes, and prepare to journey into the heart of human darkness. What you're about to hear isn't fiction. But perhaps most disturbing was how normal this seemed to Roman society. Senators would bring their wives to watch crucifixions like we might attend theater performances. Mothers would point out particularly creative torture methods to their children as examples of Roman ingenuity. The boundaries between civilization and savagery blurred until Romans could watch a man being eaten alive by insects while calmly discussing the weather or their investment portfolios. Of all Roman tortures, none struck more fear into the hearts of gladiators than the fustuarium. These were men who had killed dozens of opponents, who had faced lions and bears in single combat, who had learned to embrace death as the ultimate test of honor. Yet the mere mention of fustuarium could reduce the bravest fighter to a weeping. begging rest. This wasn't just execution, it was the complete destruction of everything a warrior held sacred. The historical record of Lucius Maximus Severus provides us with a detailed account of Fustuarium from 94 AD. Severus was a veteran gladiator who had won 47 fights and earned the wooden sword that symbolized his freedom. But when he attempted to organize a rebellion among the gladiators of the Ludus Magnus, he was captured and sentenced to Fustuarium. The account of his death, recorded by the school's physician Marcus Galerius, reads like a medical case study in systematic brutality. The Fustuarium began with the condemned gladiator being stripped naked and bound hand and foot, with chains rather than rope. This wasn't for security. Severus was surrounded by 50 guards, but because chains wouldn't break under the force of the beating, ensuring that every blow landed with full impact. He was then positioned face down in the center of the training arena, where he had once been a champion, forced to stare at the sand where his sweat and blood had earned him fame and fortune. The true horror of Fustuarium was that it was carried out by the victim's fellow gladiators. Every man in the school was forced to participate, each taking turns with wooden clubs and iron bars. These weren't random weapons, but carefully selected implements designed to break bones and rupture organs without causing immediate death. The clubs were weighted with lead cores to maximize impact, while the iron bars were shaped to concentrate force on specific body parts. The beating began at the feet and worked systematically upward. Roman military manuals specified the exact sequence to ensure maximum suffering duration. The first blows would shatter the small bones of the feet, making any attempt at escape impossible. Then the clubs would work up the legs, breaking first the fibula, then the tibia, with precise strikes that left the bone fragments embedded in surrounding muscle tissue. According to Galerius's account, Severus remained conscious and defiant through the first hour of beating. He cursed his executioners, called upon the gods to witness his courage, and even attempted to maintain his dignity by refusing to scream. But as the clubs moved to his hips and lower back, his resolve began to crack. The systematic destruction of his pelvis caused agony so intense that his body went into convulsions, and his proud silence finally broke into desperate pleas for mercy. What made Fustuarium psychologically devastating was that it forced the other gladiators to confront their own mortality while destroying their sense of brotherhood. These men had lived, trained, and fought together. They had shared meals, victories, and defeat. Some had formed bonds stronger than blood family. Yet Roman discipline was absolute. Any gladiator who showed mercy or struck with less than full force would immediately take the victim's place. The process could take 3 to 6 hours depending on the victim's physical condition and the skill of the execution. Roman physicians observed these beatings to study the effects of blunt force trauma on human anatomy, taking detailed notes that would later be used to develop even more effective techniques. They documented which bones broke first under different types of impact, how long victims typically remained conscious, and which injuries caused the most pain without triggering shock-induced unconsciousness. Galerius noted that Severus's ribs began fracturing around the second hour, with each broken bone creating internal bleeding that slowly filled his lungs with blood. His breathing became labored and bloody, but not enough to cause immediate death. The systematic beating continued up his back, with special attention paid to the kidneys and liver, organs that could be damaged severely without stopping heart function. The psychological torture reached its peak when the beating moved to areas where Severus could see the damage being inflicted. His arms and hands, once strong enough to wield gladius and shield with deadly precision, were methodically destroyed joint by joint. Hollywood has sanitized this torture method into something almost noble. A quick death with nails through the palms while the victim hangs peacefully until death mercifully arrives. The historical reality was infinitely more horrific. Roman crucifixion was a masterpiece of applied anatomy designed to maximize suffering while preventing quick death, and the Romans perfected it into a science that could keep victims conscious and screaming for up to 6 days. The detailed account of Caius Flavius Maximus provides us with a comprehensive understanding of Roman crucifixion from the victim's perspective. Maximus was a Roman citizen who was condemned to crucifixion in 91 AD for leading a tax revolt in Gaul. His status as a citizen meant that his execution was documented in detail by court officials, giving us a minute-by-minute account of a process that lasted 3 days and 12 hours. The torture began long before Maximus reached the cross. After sentencing, he was held in the Mamertine prison for 6 days while specially trained executioners studied his physical condition and planned his crucifixion for maximum effect. Roman executioners weren't brutal thugs, but trained professionals who understood human anatomy better than most physicians. They measured Maximus's height, weight, and muscle mass to determine the optimal cross dimensions and nail placement for his specific body type. Roman law required that condemned men carry their own crossbeam to the execution site. But this wasn't just humiliation, it was part of the torture. The patibulum that Maximus was forced to carry weighed 89 Roman pounds and was deliberately roughened to tear at his shoulders and back as he struggled under its weight. The journey from the Mamertine to the execution ground took 2 hours, with strategic stops every few hundred yards to allow maximum public viewing and to ensure that Maximus was sufficiently weakened, but not exhausted to the point of unconsciousness. The preliminary flogging that preceded crucifixion was itself a form of systematic torture. Maximus received 39 lashes with a flagrum, a multi-tailed whip, with each tail embedded with pieces of metal, bone, and pottery. The flogging was administered by 2 executioners working in alternation to ensure consistent force and rhythm. Each lash was positioned to remove a strip of flesh without cutting into vital areas or major blood vessels. Roman executioners had developed precise techniques for nail placement that modern forensic scientists have only recently understood. The nails didn't go through the palms, which couldn't support body weight, but through the space between the radius and ulna bones of the forearm. This placement hit the median nerve, sending constant waves of fiery pain up the arms while creating a natural lock that could support the victim's weight indefinitely. The account describes how Maximus was thrown onto his back on the crossbeam while 4 soldiers held him down. The executioner positioned a 7-inch iron nail against his right wrist and drove it through with a series of hammer blows. The first blow pierced the skin and muscle. The second cracked through bone, and the third embedded the nail point into the wood beneath. The process was repeated on the left wrist, with the executioner taking care to ensure that both nails were positioned at exactly the same angle to distribute weight evenly. The crossbeam was then lifted and fitted onto the vertical post, a process that jarred the nail wounds and sent fresh waves of agony through Maximus's arms. His feet were positioned against the post and secured with a single long nail, driven through both feet just behind the ankle bones. This positioning was crucial. It forced the victim's knees into a bent position that made normal breathing impossible while providing just enough support to prevent immediate death from asphyxiation. Once raised on the cross, Maximus discovered the true genius of Roman crucifixion engineering. His position made normal breathing impossible because the weight of his body compressed his lungs and restricted his diaphragm. To exhale, he had to push up on his nailed feet and pull with his pierced wrists, actions that sent excruciating pain through his entire body. Yet without this agonizing effort, he would suffocate within minutes. Modern studies of crucifixion show that victims typically manage 12-15 breaths per minute, compared to a normal rate of 16-20. Each breath required enormous effort and caused pain levels that maxed out modern measurement scales. The Romans had developed various modifications to control the timeline of death. Some crosses featured a small wooden seat called a sedal positioned under the victim's buttocks. This wasn't mercy. It was designed to prolong suffering by occasionally relieving pressure on the arms and allowing longer survival. Other crosses included a foot platform called a sepedineum that served the same purpose, giving victims just enough support to continue the struggle for breath for days rather than hours. Roman soldiers stationed at each cross were experts at managing the dying process. They carried sponges soaked in pasca, a mixture of wine and vinegar, that could be offered to victims to maintain consciousness when they showed signs of delirium. They also carried iron clubs for breaking legs when executions needed to be concluded quickly, though this mercy was reserved for special circumstances or when crowd interest was waning. The account describes how Maximus's agony evolved through different stages over his 3 days on the cross. The first day was characterized by intense pain and defiant anger as he cursed his executioners and called upon the gods to witness the injustice of his fate. His voice was strong, and he was able to maintain some dignity despite his nakedness and public humiliation. The second day brought delirium and hallucinations as dehydration and exhaustion began affecting his brain function. Maximus began seeing visions of his dead father and talking to imaginary companions. His voice became weak and raspy, but he continued the exhausting cycle of pushing up for breath every few seconds. Roman physicians documented that this stage often produced the most disturbing sounds as victims' breathing became labored and their vocalizations took on an inhuman quality. The third day saw the complete breakdown of Maximus's physical and mental faculties. His struggles for breath became weaker and less frequent, but he remained conscious enough to experience every moment of his deterioration. His skin had turned a mottled blue-gray color, his tongue had swollen to twice its normal size, and his body had begun consuming its own muscle tissue for energy. Roman crucifixion sites were positioned strategically to maximize psychological impact on the general population. The crosses along the Appian Way could be seen for miles, creating a forest of suffering that served as a constant reminder of Roman power. After the Spartacus rebellion, over 6,000 crosses lined the road from Rome to Capua, with victims in various stages of dying, creating a horrific spectacle that took months to fully decompose. The Romans also developed mass crucifixion techniques that could process dozens of victims simultaneously. Specialized teams worked in assembly line fashion. One group stripped and positioned victims, another drove the nails, and a third raised the crosses. During the siege of Jerusalem in 70 AD, Roman legions crucified up to 500 Jews per day, running out of wood for crosses and space to erect them. What made Roman crucifixion particularly insidious was its combination of maximum physical suffering with complete psychological destruction. They documented which organs failed first, how long consciousness could be maintained during various stages of decomposition, and which interventions could prolong survival. This medical knowledge was then applied to refining other torture methods and developing new techniques for extracting information from prisoners. The stench became unbearable after the first week. With the boats positioned downwind from residential areas to ensure that the smell served as a constant reminder to the population of what awaited those who defied Roman authority. Guards had to rotate frequently because even hardened executioners couldn't tolerate the smell for extended periods, though they were required to check on the victim regularly to document the progression of decay. Different variations of Scaphism were developed for different categories of victims. Political prisoners like Philippus received the full treatment designed to maximize both suffering duration and public impact. Military deserters might face accelerated versions with additional chemical agents that caused faster decay, but shorter survival times. Women condemned for adultery faced modified boats designed to accommodate their anatomy while emphasizing particular types of degradation. The end stages of Scaphism were marked by complete system failure as the victim's body could no longer maintain the basic functions necessary for life. Philippus survived 14 days and 6 hours, remaining conscious until the final day when massive infection finally overwhelmed his immune system. Even then, his death wasn't peaceful. The final hours were characterized by convulsions and respiratory distress as his body fought against the toxins produced by his own decay. Physician documentation shows that Scaphism victims typically lost 30–40% of their body weight through decomposition before death occurred. The longest recorded survival was 19 days for a young military officer condemned for desertion. What made Scaphism particularly effective as a deterrent wasn't just its horrific nature, but its visibility and duration. Unlike quick executions that were over in minutes or hours, Scaphism provided weeks of public spectacle that served as a constant reminder of Roman power. Citizens walking past the execution site could witness every stage of human decay, from the initial dignity of the condemned to their final transformation into something barely recognizable as human. The psychological warfare aspect of Scaphism extended beyond the immediate victim to affect entire populations. The knowledge that such a fate awaited traitors and rebels created a climate of absolute terror that made organized resistance almost impossible. Even the bravest potential conspirators had to consider whether their cause was worth risking not just death, but the complete destruction of their humanity through weeks of public decay and insect consumption. Roman records indicate that Scaphism was so effective at preventing rebellion that it was used sparingly, reserved for only the most serious crimes against the state. The mere knowledge of its existence was often sufficient to maintain order, with the threat of the boats mentioned in legal proceedings as the ultimate deterrent against treason and conspiracy. When 50,000 Romans packed the Colosseum to watch criminals fed to wild beasts, they weren't witnessing random acts of violence, but carefully choreographed performances that combined theatrical spectacle with systematic torture. Damnatio et Bestias, condemnation to the beasts, was Roman entertainment engineering at its most sophisticated, with every detail planned to maximize both human suffering and audience engagement. The result was a form of execution so complex that it required specialized animal trainers, stage directors, and mechanical engineers working together to create death as performance art. The account of Marcus Callidius Severus provides us with detailed insight into the complexity of Roman beast executions. Severus was condemned in 103 AD for organizing a gladiator rebellion and was selected for a special beast show designed to commemorate Emperor Trajan's victories in Dacia. His execution was planned by Gaius Appius Subius, Rome's most renowned beastmaster, and documented by multiple observers, including senators, foreign dignitaries, and court historians. The preparation for Severus's execution began weeks before the actual event, with teams of specialists working to design a spectacle that would combine maximum suffering with theatrical entertainment. Roman beastmasters understood that different animals provided different types of spectacle, and they selected creatures based on their killing methods, aggression levels, and visual impact on audience. This wasn't random violence, but calculated theater designed to tell specific stories through human death. The Romans had developed an extensive classification system for execution animals based on their entertainment value and torture potential. Lions were preferred for their dramatic killing style and the majesty that appealed to Roman audiences who saw themselves as inheriting the power of these royal beasts. But lions killed relatively quickly, making them suitable for standard executions rather than prolonged torture spectacle. Bears were reserved for special occasions like Severus's execution because they mauled rather than killed efficiently. Roman bear trainers had developed techniques for conditioning these animals to attack in specific ways that maximized victim suffering while creating visual spectacle for the audience. Bears could be trained to bat victims around like toys, breaking bones systematically while keeping them conscious and mobile enough to continue the entertainment. Wild boars provided a different type of spectacle, with their tusks creating spectacular wounds that bled freely for audience visual impact. Leopards and other large cats were used when agility demonstrations were desired, leaping and pouncing repeatedly without delivering killing blows. Some shows featured packs of wild dogs trained to work together in coordinated attacks that could bring down larger victims while ensuring prolonged suffering. The staging for Severus's execution involved elaborate set pieces that told the story of Prometheus being punished by the gods for stealing fire. He was chained to an artificial rock formation in the center of the arena, while specially trained eagles were released to eat his liver. But these weren't ordinary birds. They had been conditioned through months of training to eat slowly, taking small bites to prolong the performance while avoiding vital organs that would cause quick death. Roman records show that a single elaborate beast execution could cost up to 100,000 denarii, equivalent to 25 years' wages for a skilled craftsman. The expense was justified by attendance figures showing that beast shows drew larger crowds than gladiatorial combat. The mechanical aspects of Roman beast shows represented the pinnacle of ancient engineering applied to entertainment torture. The arena floor was equipped with elaborate trap door systems that could open beneath victims' feet at precisely timed moments, dropping them into pits with waiting predators. Counterweight systems could lift and lower victims to control the pace of animal attacks, raising them out of reach when the crowd wanted to prolong suspense or lowering them back into danger when excitement was needed. Severus's execution began with him being led into the arena dressed in the costume of Prometheus, complete with flowing robes and a crown of laurel leaves that gave him a dignified appearance before his degradation began. Crowd cheered as he was chained to the artificial mountain, but their enthusiasm was carefully managed by professional crowd controllers who understood how to build tension and manipulate audience emotions for maximum impact. First phase involved the release of trained wolves that had been conditioned to attack specific parts of the body without causing immediately fatal wounds. These animals circled Severus while he was chained helplessly, nipping at his legs and arms to create bleeding wounds that would attract other predators while weakening him gradually. Psychological torture of anticipation was as important as the physical damage, with Severus knowing that worse was coming while being powerless to defend himself. Roman beastmasters had developed techniques for controlling animal behavior during executions that bordered on the supernatural in their precision. Animals were trained using positive and negative reinforcement to attack in specific sequences, to respond to subtle hand signals from handlers, and to modify their aggression based on crowd reaction. Some animals were conditioned to pause their attacks at specific moments to allow maximum audience anticipation before resuming their assault. The eagles used in Severus's execution had been trained for over a year specifically for this performance. They had learned to land on the victim's chest and use their beaks to tear small pieces of flesh from the liver area while avoiding major blood vessels that would cause quick death through blood loss. The birds would eat slowly, taking breaks to allow the victim to recover consciousness if he fainted from pain, ensuring that the spectacle could continue for hours. Between animal attacks, Severus was subjected to additional tortures designed to maintain audience interest while preparing him for the next phase of his execution. Slaves would approach with heated brands to cauterize his wounds, preventing death from blood loss while creating fresh pain to keep him conscious. Others would offer him water, not out of mercy, but to ensure he remained alert enough to fully experience each stage of his destruction. The second phase of the execution introduced larger predators that had been specially prepared for the performance. A brown bear, starved for 3 days to increase its aggression, was released into the arena while Severus remained chained to his artificial mountain. The bear had been trained to approach slowly, building audience tension before beginning a systematic mauling that would last for over an hour. Roman bear trainers understood exactly how to control these massive predators during execution performances. The bear attacking Severus had learned to respond to horn signals from handlers positioned around the arena, increasing or decreasing its aggression based on crowd reaction and the overall pacing of the show. When audience excitement peaked, the bear would deliver more dramatic attacks. When tension needed to build, it would circle menacingly while the victim anticipated the next assault. The psychological torture reached its peak when Severus realized that his death was being orchestrated like a theatrical performance, with his agony carefully managed for maximum entertainment value. He wasn't just dying. He was being used as a prop in a show designed to amuse the very people whose rebellion he had tried to organize. This knowledge often broke victims' spirits more completely than any physical torture could achieve. Training records. Roman beast master schools maintained detailed records of animal training techniques. One manual describes methods for teaching bears to play with victims for specific time periods before delivering killing blows, with different techniques for different types of execution shows. The final phase of Severus's execution involved the release of a pack of specially trained wild dogs, while the bear continued its mauling. These animals had been conditioned to work together in coordinated attacks, with some dogs focusing on the victim's extremities while others went for the torso. The combination of multiple predators attacking simultaneously created a feeding frenzy that provided spectacular visual entertainment, while ensuring that death, when it finally came, would be complete and unmistakable. Throughout the entire process, Roman physicians monitored Severus's condition to ensure that he remained conscious and capable of experiencing pain for as long as possible. They had developed techniques for reviving victims who lost consciousness from shock or blood loss, using smelling salts, cold water, and even primitive stimulants to keep them alert during their destruction. The goal wasn't just death, but maximal awareness of the dying process. The duration of beast executions was carefully calculated based on crowd psychology and practical considerations. Severus's death took 2 hours and 47 minutes from the first wolf attack to his final breath, a timeline that provided enough spectacle to satisfy the audience, while not extending so long that crowd interest waned. Professional show directors understood exactly how to pace these executions for maximum emotional impact. What made Damnatio ad Bestias particularly effective as both entertainment and social control was its combination of spectacular death with symbolic meaning. Audiences saw criminals being literally consumed by the wild forces that Rome had tamed through civilization, reinforcing the message that those who threatened Roman order would be reduced to prey for the beasts that Rome controlled. The spectacle demonstrated Roman power over both human rebels and the natural world itself. The Brazen Bull represented the pinnacle of Roman mechanical engineering applied to human torture. What appeared to be a beautiful bronze sculpture of a bull was actually a sophisticated execution device that could slowly roast victims alive while transforming their screams into music for the entertainment of watching crowds. This wasn't crude brutality, but precision engineering that demonstrated Roman technical mastery over both metallurgy and acoustics, creating an instrument of death that was as much a work of art as it was a tool of systematic cruelty. The execution of Senator Lucius Cornelius Sulla Felix in 97 AD provides us with the most detailed account of how the Brazen Bull functioned as both torture device and public spectacle. Sulla had been convicted of treason for his involvement in a conspiracy against Emperor Nerva, and his high social status meant that his execution was designed to serve as both punishment and demonstration of Roman technical superiority. The bull used for his execution was a masterpiece of bronze casting and mechanical engineering that had taken over a year to construct. The Brazen Bull stood 8 feet tall and 12 feet long, cast from bronze that had been alloyed with tin and lead to create specific thermal properties that would conduct heat evenly while maintaining structural integrity under extreme temperatures. The exterior was decorated with intricate reliefs showing scenes of Roman military victories, making it appear to observers as a work of commemorative art rather than an instrument of torture. Only the small door in the bull's side hinted at its true purpose. The interior of the bull was completely hollow, creating a chamber large enough to hold a human body but small enough to prevent comfortable positioning. The walls were lined with bronze studs positioned at precise intervals to ensure that the victim would be in constant contact with the heated metal, regardless of how they tried to position themselves. The floor was sloped toward drainage holes that would allow bodily fluids to escape while preventing the accumulation of materials that might provide insulation from the heat. The true genius of the Brazen Bull lay in its acoustic system, an intricate network of tubes and chambers designed by Rome's finest engineers to transform human screams into sounds resembling an angry bull. The acoustic chambers were positioned throughout the bull's head and neck with carefully calculated dimensions that would modify pitch, tone, and volume based on the intensity of the victim's vocalizations. Different levels of agony would produce different musical notes, effectively turning human suffering into a grotesque musical performance. Sulla's execution began with a ceremony designed to emphasize the artistic and technical achievements represented by the Brazen Bull. Dignitaries, senators, and foreign ambassadors were invited to examine the bull's exterior craftsmanship before the execution began, with court engineers explaining the sophisticated metallurgy and acoustic engineering that made the device possible. This wasn't just punishment, but a demonstration of Roman technological superiority that served diplomatic and propaganda purposes. The preparation for Sulla's placement in the bull involved stripping him naked and binding his hands behind his back to prevent him from bracing himself against the interior wall. He was then forced through the small door in the bull's side, a process that required him to crawl on hands and knees while crowds jeered at his degradation. The door was sealed with bronze bolts and clay mortar that would prevent any possibility of escape once the heating process began. Roman metallurgists calculated that the bronze bull would reach internal temperatures of 250 degrees Celsius, 482 Fahrenheit within 30 minutes of lighting the fire. Victims typically survived 45 to 90 minutes, depending on their physical condition and the fire's intensity. The fire beneath the bull was carefully controlled using a system of adjustable air vents and fuel chambers that allowed executioners to regulate the temperature with precision. This wasn't random burning, but controlled heating, designed to maximize suffering duration while ensuring that the acoustic system would function properly. Too much heat would kill the victim quickly, while too little wouldn't produce the dramatic effects that Roman audiences expected. As the bronze began to heat up, Sulla experienced the gradual transition from discomfort to agony that made the Brazen Bull particularly psychologically devastating. Unlike other forms of execution that involved immediate severe pain, the bull created slowly building torture that allowed victims to fully comprehend their fate while being powerless to escape it. The psychological anticipation often proved as devastating as the physical torture itself. The acoustic transformation of Sulla's screams began almost immediately as the bronze reached body temperature and started causing pain. His initial calls for mercy and pleas for intervention were modified by the bull's internal chambers into low, rumbling sounds that resembled an agitated bull. As the heat increased and his pain intensified, his screams became higher-pitched and more desperate, producing sounds that the acoustic system transformed into what observers described as music of the gods. Roman engineers had designed different acoustic chambers to respond to different types of vocalizations, creating a complex musical instrument that used human suffering as its power source. Deep groans of agony would resonate through larger chambers that produced bass notes, while sharp screams of pain would be channeled through smaller tubes that created higher-pitched sounds. The combination created what Roman audiences considered a form of divine music that demonstrated the gods' approval of the execution. The heating process followed predictable stages that Roman executioners had studied and documented through previous uses of the bull. The first stage involved the victim experiencing increasing discomfort as the bronze reached temperatures that made contact painful, but not immediately damaging. This stage could last 15 to 20 minutes, during which the victim would struggle to find positions that minimized contact with the heating walls. The second stage began when the bronze reached temperatures that caused immediate pain upon contact, but hadn't yet begun causing serious tissue damage. Sulla's movements became more frantic as he tried unsuccessfully to avoid touching the heated walls, while his vocalizations increased in intensity and frequency. The acoustic system responded by producing more complex musical arrangements that pleased the audience, while indicating the victim's increasing distress. As the bronze continued heating toward its maximum temperature, Sulla entered the third stage of the torture process. The metal was now hot enough to cause immediate burns upon contact, making it impossible for him to find any position that provided relief from the pain. His skin began blistering wherever it touched the bronze, while the heat began affecting his respiratory system as he breathed superheated air that damaged his lungs and throat. The fourth and final stage occurred when the bronze reached its maximum temperature and began actually cooking the victim's flesh. Sulla's movements became convulsive as his nervous system was overwhelmed by pain signals from throughout his body. His screams reached their highest intensity, producing the climactic musical effects that Roman audiences considered the artistic peak of the bull's performance. Modern studies of the Brazen Bull's design show that its acoustic chambers could transform human screams into recognizable musical scales. Some chambers were tuned to produce specific notes that corresponded to Roman musical theory. creating what audiences perceived as divine approval of the execution. Roman executioners used various techniques to control the timing and intensity of Brazen Bull executions based on the audience and the political message being conveyed. For particularly hated criminals like Sulla, the fire would be built up gradually to maximize suffering duration and provide extended entertainment. For routine executions, more intense fires would reduce the process to 30 or 40 minutes while still providing adequate spectacle for crowd satisfaction. The psychological impact of the Brazen Bull extended far beyond its immediate victim to affect everyone who witnessed or heard about the execution. The combination of artistic beauty with horrific function created a uniquely Roman form of terror that demonstrated the empire's ability to transform even death into a demonstration of cultural superiority. Foreign dignitaries who witnessed Brazen Bull executions returned to their home countries with accounts that spread Roman reputation for sophisticated cruelty throughout the known world. Different versions of the Brazen Bull were constructed for different purposes and locations throughout the Roman Empire. Some featured adjustable acoustic systems that could be tuned to produce different musical effects. Others included viewing windows that allowed audiences to see the victim during the execution process. All maintained the basic principle of using human suffering to create spectacular entertainment that reinforced Roman power and cultural achievement. The execution of Sulla lasted 1 hour and 23 minutes from the lighting of the fire to his final breath. Roman physicians monitoring the process documented the stages of his death for future reference, noting that consciousness was maintained until the final 10 minutes when brain damage from the extreme heat finally caused merciful unconsciousness. Even then, the acoustic system continued producing sounds as his body's reflexive movements continued generating vocalizations that the bull's chambers transformed into what observers described as death song. What made the Brazen Bull particularly effective as both torture and propaganda was its demonstration that Romans could transform even the most brutal executions into artistic achievements that showcased their technical and cultural superiority. This wasn't just killing, but the elevation of death to the level of performance art, showing that Roman civilization could find beauty and meaning even in human destruction. In the hierarchy of Roman crimes, nothing was considered more heinous than patricide, the murder of one's father. This act was seen as such a fundamental violation of the natural order that it required a punishment that transcended normal human execution and entered the realm of ritual purification. Poena Cullei, punishment of the sack, was reserved exclusively for this ultimate crime, and it represented Roman systematic cruelty at its most symbolically complex and physically horrific. The execution of Marcus Brutus Calvinus in 89 AD provides us with the most complete account of Poena Cullei in all its ritualistic horror. Calvinus had murdered his father to inherit the family fortune and had been caught when slaves witnessed the crime and testified under torture. His conviction for patricide triggered a legal process that was as much religious ritual as criminal punishment, involving priests, augurs, and specialized executioners who understood the symbolic meaning of every element in the complex execution procedure. The preparation for Poena Cullei began with a purification ceremony designed to cleanse the community of the pollution caused by patricide. Roman religious law held that the unnatural act of killing one's father contaminated not just the criminal, but the entire social order, requiring elaborate rituals to restore cosmic balance. Calvinus was held in a special underground chamber for 7 days while priests performed sacrifices and purification rites designed to contain the spiritual contamination of his crime. The symbolic elements of Poena Cullei were as important as its physical tortures, with each animal selected for specific religious and cultural meaning that amplified the psychological impact of the punishment. A dog represented the loyalty that Calvinus had betrayed by killing his father. A rooster symbolized the family protection that had failed when a son became a predator. A viper embodied the poison of filial betrayal that corrupted the most sacred bonds of Roman society. An ape mocked the humanity that Calvinus had abandoned through his unnatural crime. The leather sack used for Poena Cullei wasn't a crude improvised container but a precisely crafted instrument of torture that represented months of specialized preparation. The sack was made from specially treated cowhide that would resist decay longer than human flesh, ensuring that the execution process would be prolonged rather than mercifully quick. It measured exactly 7 feet in length and 4 feet in width, providing just enough space for a human body and the 4 animals, while ensuring that movement would be severely restricted for all occupants. The interior of the sack was lined with coarse cloth that had been soaked in irritating substances designed to cause additional pain and prevent the condemned man from finding any comfortable position. Sharp metal studs were positioned at intervals along the seams to ensure that any movement would result in cuts and puncture wounds that would attract the animal's attention, while providing additional sources of agony for the victim. Roman legal documents show that Poena Cullei involved 23 separate ritual elements, each with specific symbolic meaning. The complete preparation process took 7 days and required the participation of 15 different categories of religious and legal officials. The process of placing Calvinus in the sack was itself a form of systematic torture designed to maximize both physical pain and psychological terror. He was first stripped naked and beaten with rods by the lictors, not as additional punishment, but as part of the purification ritual designed to drive evil spirits from his body. The beating was carefully controlled to cause pain and humiliation without inflicting injuries that might cause quick death. Once the sack process began, the animals were introduced into the sack one at a time while Calvinus was forced to watch, each addition increasing his terror as he contemplated what was coming. The dog went in first, already agitated from being confined and handled by strangers. It immediately began snapping at anything within reach, including Calvinus's feet and legs as he was forced into the sack's opening. The psychological impact of feeling the animal's teeth tearing at his flesh while knowing that 3 more creatures would be added created anticipatory terror that often broke victims before the sack was even sealed. The rooster was added next, its natural tendency to use claws and beak for defense, making it an ideal instrument of torture in the confined space of the sack. Roman executioners had learned that roosters would attack anything that moved in dark, confined spaces, and this bird immediately began clawing at both Calvinus and the dog, while all 3 occupants struggled for position in the increasingly crowded container. The viper represented the most psychologically devastating element of Poena Cullei because its presence introduced the constant threat of death by poisoning, while ensuring that such death would be neither quick nor certain. Roman serpent handlers selected snakes based on their venom's effects, choosing species that would cause excruciating pain and eventual death, but not immediately fatal paralysis that might end the torture prematurely. The snake would strike repeatedly in its panic, injecting small amounts of venom that would cause increasing agony without immediate lethality. The ape was added last, and its inclusion represented perhaps the most sophisticated psychological torture element in the entire process. Apes were considered by Romans to be mockeries of humanity, creatures that resembled people but lacked human souls and reason. Forcing Calvinus to share his final moments with an ape symbolized his reduction from human to animal status through the commission of his unnatural crime. Once all 4 animals and the condemned man were secured in the leather sack, the opening was sewn shut with bronze wire that couldn't be torn or broken, regardless of how desperately the occupants struggled. The sewing process was performed while priests chanted prayers designed to ensure that Calvinus's spirit would be trapped with the animals in the afterlife, denying him any possibility of peaceful existence even after death. The sealed sack was then transported to the Tiber River in a ceremonial procession that allowed maximum public viewing while emphasizing the religious significance of the punishment. Citizens lined the route to witness the ultimate consequence of patricide, while priests explained the symbolic meaning of each element to ensure that the educational value of the spectacle was fully realized. Children were brought to witness the procession as part of their moral education about filial duty and respect for paternal authority. The final stage of Poena Cullei involved throwing the sealed sack into the river from the Pons Sublicius. a wooden bridge that was considered sacred to the gods who controlled justice and family relationships. The sack was weighted with stones to ensure that it would sink immediately, but not so heavily that it would descend quickly to the river bottom where death might come mercifully fast through drowning. Survival records. Roman legal archives document cases where Poena Cullei sacks washed ashore before the occupants died. In such cases, surviving animals would continue attacking the still-living condemned person on the riverbank, with Roman law requiring that the process be allowed to continue naturally rather than providing any intervention or mercy. The underwater phase of Poena Cullei could last anywhere from 15 minutes to over an hour depending on water temperature, the victim's physical condition, and the behavior of the animal. In Calvinus's case, witnesses on the bridge reported seeing the sack moving violently underwater for approximately 45 minutes, indicating that the occupants remained alive and struggling throughout most of that time period. The psychological torture of Poena Cullei reached its peak in the underwater phase when Calvinus would have been fully aware that he was drowning while simultaneously being attacked by 4 panicked animals in complete darkness. The combination of suffocation, animal attacks, snake venom, and the knowledge that his death was being orchestrated as divine punishment for his crime created a level of comprehensive suffering that Romans considered appropriate for the ultimate violation of natural law. Roman religious authorities believed that Poena Cullei served not just as punishment for the individual criminal, but as a cosmic rebalancing that restored the natural order disrupted by patricide. The mixing of human-animal blood in the sacred river was considered necessary to cleanse the pollution caused by the original crime, while the public spectacle served to reinforce social values and deter similar violations of filial duty. Different variations of Poena Cullei were developed for different categories of family murder. Women who killed their husbands faced modified versions with different animals that symbolized specific types of marital betrayal. Children who killed their mothers were subjected to variations that emphasized the violation of maternal bonds. All versions maintained the core principle that unnatural crimes required unnatural punishments that transcended normal human execution methods. The legal and religious framework surrounding Poena Cullei ensured that it remained in use throughout the Roman Empire for over 600 years, with regional variations developing based on local animal availability and religious customs. Coastal regions might substitute sea creatures for river animals, while mountain provinces developed versions using local predators, but all maintained the essential symbolic elements that made the punishment both legally valid and religiously effective. What made Poena Cullei uniquely Roman was its combination of systematic cruelty with sophisticated symbolism that transformed individual punishment into community ritual. This wasn't just execution, but cosmic drama that reinforced the fundamental values of Roman civilization while demonstrating the consequences of violating the natural order that Romans believed their empire represented and protected. As we reach the end of our journey through the darkest chambers of Roman torture, it's crucial to understand that these methods didn't disappear with the fall of the empire. The systematic approaches to human suffering that Romans developed influenced interrogation and execution techniques for the next 2 millennia, with echoes of Roman innovation appearing in medieval European justice, colonial punishment systems, and even modern interrogation facilities where international observers are never permitted to visit. The Roman understanding of psychology and systematic torture was so advanced that Nazi interrogators during World War II studied, preserved Roman documents to develop their own techniques for breaking prisoners. The combination of physical pain with psychological manipulation, the use of anticipation and uncertainty as weapons, and the systematic destruction of human dignity that characterized Roman torture became templates for organized cruelty that continued to influence human behavior long after the last Roman emperor fell from power. Modern human rights investigators have documented the use of techniques that bear striking similarities to Roman innovations in facilities operated by governments that prefer to operate beyond the reach of international oversight. The systematic approach to breaking human resistance, the careful calibration of pain to avoid death while maximizing suffering, and the use of environmental manipulation to enhance psychological pressure all trace their origins back to methods first perfected in the torture chambers beneath the Colosseum. What made Roman torture particularly insidious was its normalization within civilized society. Citizens who considered themselves cultured and sophisticated could watch human beings torn apart by wild animals while calmly discussing philosophy or business arrangements. This normalization of cruelty created a template for how advanced civilizations could gradually accept increasing levels of brutality until even the most extreme forms of suffering seemed natural and necessary. The Roman legacy reminds us that the capacity for systematic cruelty exists within all human societies, and that the most dangerous monsters are often not individual sadists, but organized systems that transform human suffering into routine administrative procedures. The screams that once echoed through marble halls and stone amphitheaters serve as warnings about the prices civilizations pay when they begin to see some people as less than human. As you drift into sleep tonight, remember that understanding this dark chapter of human history isn't just an exercise in historical curiosity, but a necessary education about the depths to which human civilization can sink when cruelty becomes entertainment and suffering becomes spectacle. The most important lesson from Roman torture isn't the catalog of their techniques, but the recognition that ordinary people like us, created and participated in these systems of organized brutality. Good night, and may your dreams be free from the echoes of ancient screams that once provided the soundtrack to the world's most powerful empire. Sleep peacefully, knowing that you live in a time when such systematic cruelty is no longer accepted as normal entertainment. But never forget that the capacity for both great good and terrible evil remains within every human heart, waiting for circumstances to determine which impulse will prevail. The dramatic effects that Roman audiences expected. As the bronze began to heat up, Sulla experienced the gradual transition from discomfort to agony that made the Brazen Bull particularly psychologically devastating. Unlike other forms of execution that involved immediate severe pain, the bull created slowly building torture that allowed victims to fully comprehend their fate while being powerless to escape it. The psychological anticipation often proved as devastating as the physical torture itself. The acoustic transformation of Sulla's screams began almost immediately as the bronze reached body temperature and started causing pain. His initial calls for mercy and pleas for intervention were modified by the bull's internal chambers into low, rumbling sounds that resembled an agitated bull. As the heat increased and his pain intensified, his screams became higher-pitched and more desperate, producing sounds that the acoustic system transformed into what observers described as music of the gods. Roman engineers had designed different acoustic chambers to respond to different types of vocalizations, creating a complex musical instrument that used human suffering as its power source. Deep groans of agony would resonate through larger chambers that produced bass notes, while sharp screams of pain would be channeled through smaller tubes that created higher-pitched sounds. The combination created what Roman audiences considered a form of divine music that demonstrated the gods' approval of the execution. The heating process followed predictable stages that Roman executioners had studied and documented through previous uses of the bull. The first stage involved the victim experiencing increasing discomfort as the bronze reached temperatures that made contact painful, but not immediately damaging. This stage could last 15 to 20 minutes, during which the victim would struggle to find positions that minimized contact with the heating walls. The second stage began when the bronze reached temperatures that caused immediate pain upon contact, but hadn't yet begun causing serious tissue damage. Sulla's movements became more frantic as he tried unsuccessfully to avoid touching the heated walls, while his vocalizations increased in intensity and frequency. The acoustic system responded by producing more complex musical arrangements that pleased the audience, while indicating the victim's increasing distress. As the bronze continued heating toward its maximum temperature, Sulla entered the third stage of the torture process. Hey, The metal was now hot enough to cause immediate burns upon contact, making it impossible for him to find any position that provided relief from the pain. His skin began blistering wherever it touched the bronze, while the heat began affecting his respiratory system as he breathed superheated air that damaged his lungs and throat. The fourth and final stage occurred when the bronze reached its maximum temperature and began actually cooking the victim's flesh. Sulla's movements became convulsive as his nervous system was overwhelmed by pain signals from throughout his body. His screams reached their highest intensity, producing the climactic musical effects that Roman audiences considered the artistic peak of the bull's performance.